The beggar saw the waiter putting something in the millionaire's juice, but when he tried to warn him... Frank Johnson trembled as he watched the scene through the window of the Golden Crown restaurant in Beverly Hills. The waiter in a bow tie had poured something into the glass of orange juice he was preparing, and Frank knew exactly who that drink was for. That's when he saw Richard Blackwell, the millionaire businessman, approaching the reserved table. Frank couldn't let this happen. His legs shook as he pushed through the glass door of the restaurant, ignoring the disdainful looks from the well-dressed patrons. "Mr. Blackwell," Frank shouted, rushing between the elegant tables. "Don't drink that. The waiter put something in your juice." Silence fell over the dining room. Richard stopped mid-step, staring at the man in tattered clothes and a dirty wool cap. The waiter, a young man no older than 25, turned pale as he clutched the tray. "How did this beggar get in here?" a woman at the next table asked, covering her nose with a napkin. "Security," the maitre d' called, waving over two uniformed men who quickly approached. "Wait," Richard said, raising his hand. His dark eyes studied Frank with curiosity. "What did you say about my juice?" Frank pointed at the young waiter, who was now visibly sweating. "I saw him put a white powder in your drink, sir. I was outside watching and saw everything through the window." The waiter, whose name tag read Jason, shook his head desperately. "That's a lie. I just... Just what?" Richard asked, stepping closer to the table where the glass of juice sat. The orange liquid looked normal, but a faint layer of powder was still visible around the rim. "Mr. Blackwell," the maitre d' said, sweating nervously, "I assure you, our establishment would never allow—" "Shut up," Richard cut in, never taking his eyes off the waiter. "Jason, is that your name? Answer me. What did you put in my drink?" The young man glanced around, searching for an escape. His hands trembled as he held the silver tray. "It was just vitamin C, sir. You always ask for vitamin C in your juice. It's right here on the order." Richard picked up the order slip and read it. Sure enough, it said, "Orange juice with vitamin C." He looked back at Frank, who was still being held by security. "It's true," Richard murmured. "I always ask for vitamin C. But you..." He pointed at Frank. "How did you know who I was?" Frank swallowed hard. For years he had watched Richard from afar, waiting for a chance to approach. I know you, Mr. Blackwell, from a long time ago." "Get this beggar out of here," a customer demanded. "He's ruining our lunch." "No," Richard said, signaling for security to release Frank. "I want to hear what he has to say." Jason took advantage of the distraction and tried to slip away, but Richard called him back. "You stay right here too. I want to get to the bottom of this." The restaurant was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped serving to watch. Frank wiped his dirty hands on his pants before speaking. "Mr. Blackwell, my name is Frank Johnson. We knew each other a long time ago. I was your partner at Johnson & Blackwell Construction." The glass slipped from Richard's hand and shattered on the marble floor. The juice spread like an orange stain among the shards. Jason took a step back, startled. "Frank Johnson," Richard whispered. "But you lost everything. You disappeared. That was over 15 years ago." "I did lose everything," Frank admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "The company, the house, my family. All because of that shopping mall project in Newport Beach, remember?" Richard ran a hand through his graying hair. How could he forget? The project that bankrupted them, or rather, the project that bankrupted Frank. Richard had managed to save himself by selling his share before the scandal broke. "But what does this have to do with the waiter?" asked a curious customer. Jason, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "I can explain. My name isn't just Jason. It's Jason Wilson. My mother is Constance Wilson." Richard grew even paler. "Constance? The Constance who worked in my house for 10 years? "The same," replied Jason, bitterness in his voice. "The woman you fired without just cause when I was 15, leaving us both in misery. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot when we're just starting out. Now, back to the story." Frank watched the tension rise between Richard and Jason. He had seen the young man put the powder in the juice and truly thought it was something malicious. Now he understood the situation was far more complex. "Constance worked for you?" Frank asked. "I remember her. A very hard-working woman." "Too hard-working," said Jason, fists clenched. "So much so she forgot to live. She worked from dawn to dusk in that house, taking care of the Blackwell family while I grew up alone." "I didn't fire your mother without reason," Richard defended himself. "There was an issue with money that went missing from my office." "What money?" Jason exploded. "My mother never stole a penny in her life. You accused her just because you needed a scapegoat." The other customers began murmuring among themselves. The maitre d' approached nervously. "Gentlemen, please, could you continue this conversation in private? You're disturbing the other guests." "No," said a strong female voice from the restaurant entrance. "They'll continue right here in front of everyone." Everyone turned to see a woman around 50, thin, with graying hair tied in a bun. She wore a simple but clean dress and carried a worn leather bag. "Mom?" Jason whispered, dropping the tray on the floor. "Constance," Richard said, his voice faltering. "That's right," she replied, walking firmly to the center of the room. "Constance Wilson, the thief you all know." Frank recognized her immediately. She had served coffee during many business meetings at Richard's house, always discreet, always polite. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Jason asked, clearly embarrassed. "I came to get my son, who left home 3 days ago, to work here without telling me." Constance looked straight at Richard. "And I found out he's serving the man who destroyed our lives." "Constance, Richard began. "Enough," she cut him off. 15 years I've waited for this chance. 15 years working as a cleaner, a laundress, a cook, anything to support my son after you threw me out on the street." "But you took the money," Richard insisted. $300 from my office." "I did take it," Constance said, surprising everyone. "You know why? Because it was mine. It was my Christmas bonus you promised to give me at the end of the year, but when December came, you made up that theft story to avoid paying me." The silence was deafening. Richard opened and closed his mouth several times, unable to respond. Frank vaguely remembered Richard mentioning financial troubles back then. The construction company was already struggling, and he was cutting costs wherever he could. "That's not true," Richard murmured. "I would never do that." "No?" Constance opened her worn bag and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "Then explain this." She handed him the envelope. Inside was a letter on the construction company's letterhead, in Richard's handwriting, promising to pay the Christmas bonus in December. The date was from November 15 years ago. "I kept it as proof," said Constance, "because I knew one day you'd try to deny it." Richard looked at the paper with trembling hands. He vaguely remembered writing it, but the last months of the company had been a blur of worry and despair. I was going through so much at the time," he said, almost whispering. "The company was failing. I was about to lose everything." "And you decided the housekeeper with a son to raise could lose everything too," Constance finished, "because her life didn't matter as much as yours." Frank felt a pang of guilt. He had also abandoned Richard when things got tough, trying to save only himself. "Constance," Frank said, "you were also a victim of our irresponsibility. Richard and I made many mistakes back then." "At least you admit it," she replied. But Mr. Blackwell was always too proud to acknowledge his own faults. Jason watched his mother with a mix of admiration and concern. "Mom, let's go. This place isn't for us." "No," Constance said firmly. "We're not leaving until I say everything I need to say." She turned to the other diners who were watching open-mouthed. "Do you think you know this man? That he's a successful businessman, someone to look up to?" "Ma'am, please," the maitre d' begged. "Don't make a scene." "I already am," Constance replied. "This man built his fortune by stepping on those who trusted him. On me, on Frank, on how many others?" An elderly woman at the corner table stood and approached. She was elegant, with white hair and an upright posture, wearing a blue tweed suit. "Excuse me," she said softly but firmly. "May I ask who you are?" "I'm Constance Wilson. I worked in this man's house for 10 years, Constance answered, pointing at Richard. The older woman nodded slowly. "I remember you. My name is Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell. I'm Richard's mother. Richard's jaw dropped. Mom, what are you doing here? Having lunch, Mrs. Blackwell replied curtly. As I do every Wednesday for the past 5 years, always at this corner table, and always watching you, waiting to see if anything remained of the son I raised. You've been here the whole time? Frank asked, surprised. I have, and I heard every word. Mrs. Blackwell looked at Constance with respect. Mrs. Wilson, I remember you very well. One of the most honest people ever to work in our home. Mrs. Blackwell, Constance said, her voice softer, you were always kind to me. And you were like a second mother to Richard when he was a boy, Mrs. Blackwell said. That's why I can't understand how my son could treat you this way. Richard was visibly shaken. Mom, you don't understand what I was going through. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Blackwell cut in. You were losing money and decided to cut corners on people's dignity, the exact opposite of everything I tried to teach you. Frank watched the Blackwell family unraveling in front of everyone. He felt partly responsible. After all, he had been Richard's partner in the construction company that caused so much trouble. Mrs. Blackwell, Frank said, I'm also to blame in this story. If I hadn't convinced Richard to invest in that reckless project, you didn't convince him of anything, Mrs. Blackwell interrupted. Richard was always too ambitious for his own good. You just gave him the opportunity he was already looking for. Constance looked at Frank curiously. So you're the famous partner who disappeared when the company went under? I am, Frank admitted, lowering his head. And I'm not proud of it. I abandoned Richard at the worst time of his life, because I was only thinking of myself. At least you admitted it, Constance said. That's more than he ever did for me. Jason, who had remained silent throughout the entire discussion, finally spoke. Mom, why did you never tell me his grandmother was different? Because I didn't want you to grow up with hatred in your heart, Constance replied. Mrs. Elizabeth always tried to help me within her means. It's true, Mrs. Elizabeth confirmed. I offered to lend Constance money when I heard about the dismissal, but she refused. She said she didn't want charity. Because charity wasn't what I needed, Constance said. I needed justice. I needed recognition that I wasn't a thief. Richard finally spoke up, his voice hoarse. Constance, I apologize, you're right. I was desperate and took the easiest way out, not the fairest one. 15 years too late, Constance murmured. It's never too late to do the right thing, Mrs. Elizabeth said. Richard, you will make amends for this mistake. How, Mother? What can I do now? Constance stepped closer to Richard, looking him straight in the eyes. You can start by publicly admitting that I never stole anything. Right here, in front of all these people. The restaurant fell completely silent. Even the waiters had stopped to listen. Richard took a deep breath. Constance Wilson never stole money from my home. I fired her unjustly because I was going through financial difficulties and used her as a scapegoat. I publicly apologize for this cowardice. A few customers began to clap hesitantly. Constance nodded, but her face still showed pain. Thank you, she said, but words won't give me back 15 years of humiliation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Frank approached Constance. Mrs. Wilson, I know I have no right to weigh in, but may I suggest something? Go ahead, she said. Richard owes you much more than an apology. You deserve compensation for the lost years. And I also owe him an explanation for 15 years of abandonment. What are you proposing? Richard asked. That the three of us sit down and talk like civilized adults, away from here, in a neutral place, and that each of us takes responsibility. Mrs. Elizabeth clapped her hands. Finally, someone speaking sense. Richard, you will accept this proposal. It's not a proposal, Constance said. It's a demand. I want everything settled once and for all. Jason moved closer to his mother. Mom, are you sure? Maybe it's better to leave the past behind. Son, for 15 years I let the past eat me up inside. Now it's time to resolve it. All right, Richard agreed. Where do you want to talk? At my house, Mrs. Elizabeth said. Saturday afternoon. And I want everyone there, including Jason. He has the right to know the whole truth. Mrs. Elizabeth, you don't have to trouble yourself, Constance said. It's no trouble. It's necessary. Mrs. Elizabeth glanced around the restaurant. And now let's all leave before the restaurant management sues us for disturbing the peace. The maitre d', who had been frozen during the whole scene, finally stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I must ask you to... We're already leaving, Richard said. Jason, you can go back to work. We'll talk later. No, Jason said firmly. I quit. I won't serve anyone who humiliated my mother. Son, you need this job, Constance protested. I need my dignity more, Jason replied, removing his bow tie and placing it on the table. Some things are more important than money. Frank smiled for the first time in years. That boy has character. He gets it from his mother. Now what? Constance asked. My son is unemployed because of me. He's unemployed because of his own conscience, corrected Mrs. Elizabeth. And that's something to be proud of, not sorry about. Richard watched Jason leave the Golden Crown restaurant with his head held high. There was something familiar in that attitude, something he recognized from his younger self when he still had principles. Frank, Richard said, how did you survive all these years? One day at a time, Frank replied, working wherever I could, sleeping wherever possible, but always hoping for a chance to talk to you. Why? To ask me for money? No, said Frank, to ask for forgiveness, and to see if there's anything left of the man I once knew. Constance watched the two men with curiosity. Were you friends before you were partners? We were brothers, Frank said. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same school. Richard was like a brother to me. And you were the brother I chose, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. That's why it hurt so much when you disappeared. I didn't disappear, Frank protested. You kicked me out of the company, said I was incompetent and would drag us both down. Because you were, Richard said. That project was doomed from the start, and you kept pushing for it. Because I believed we could turn it around, Frank snapped. You gave up before even trying to fight. Mrs. Elizabeth tapped her cane on the floor. Enough. You two are acting like squabbling children. Save that energy for Saturday when we can talk calmly. Constance nodded. Mrs. Elizabeth is right. This isn't the place to resolve 15 years of resentment. Are you really coming on Saturday? Richard asked Frank. I'll be there, Frank said. But I want you to know I'm not expecting charity. I just want to clear the air between us. And I want you to know I don't have endless money, Richard said. The construction company really went under back then. It took me years to rebuild. Nobody's talking about money yet, Constance said. First, we'll talk about the truth. Then we'll see what each of us deserves. They parted ways at the restaurant door. Frank returned to the square where he usually spent his afternoons. Constance and Jason went home, and Richard stood on the sidewalk watching his mother get into the taxi. Richard, Mrs. Elizabeth said through the car window, you have 3 days to think about the man you want to be for the rest of your life. Don't waste this chance. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He paced through his empty house, remembering the days when Constance would make dinner and take care of everything while he focused on business. She really had been like a second mother to him. Meanwhile, Frank lay on a piece of cardboard under the awning of a closed store, thinking about what it would be like to reunite with the best friend he'd lost to pride and fear. Constance, in her modest home in Queens, talked with Jason about the meeting set for Saturday. Mum, do you really think it's worth reopening old wounds? Jason asked. Son, that wound never healed because it was never properly treated, Constance replied. It's time to settle this once and for all. What if they don't do anything to make up for what happened? Then at least I'll have peace knowing I tried, and you'll know your mother fought for her dignity. On Thursday, Frank showed up at Richard's doorstep. He was cleaner than he'd been at the restaurant, having washed up in the public restroom at the station. What do you want? Richard asked through the gate. To talk, Frank said. Before Saturday, there are things I need to tell you in private. Richard hesitated but opened the gate. He led Frank to the backyard garden, away from the ears of the current housekeeper. Go ahead, Richard said. That mall project really was risky, Frank began, but not for the reasons you thought. What do you mean? I knew there were issues with the property paperwork. I knew we could have problems with the city. But I was desperate to prove I could handle a big deal. Richard stared at him. You hid information from me. I did, admitted Frank. And when everything started falling apart, instead of taking responsibility, I let you carry the weight alone. Why? Why are you telling me this now? Because 15 years on the streets taught me the value of honesty, said Frank. And because I want you to know that Constance wasn't the only person you hurt unfairly. You were also a victim of my dishonesty. Richard sank heavily into the garden chair. So I was right when I said you'd drag us to the bottom. You were. But you were wrong when you fired Constance to save money. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Frank, why didn't you come to me sooner? Why wait 15 years? Because it took me 15 years to find the courage to admit I was wrong, said Frank. And because I hoped one day you'd come looking for me too. I didn't know where you were, said Richard. After you disappeared, I tried to find you a few times, but you'd completely vanished. I didn't vanish. I was there, on the streets downtown, watching you drive by a few times, but I was too ashamed to approach you. Richard shook his head. What a waste of time. 15 years lost because of our pride. They weren't completely lost, said Frank. I learned a lot in those years. About humility, about the value of ordinary people, about what really matters in life. And I learned how to be successful, but forgot how to be a good person, said Richard. My mother is right. I've become someone I don't even recognize. It's not too late to change, said Frank. Look at us, talking like adults now. That's progress already. Frank, I want to make things right with Constance, said Richard, but I don't know where to start. Start by listening to what she has to say. Really listening. No defending, no justifying. Just hear her. And then? Then you offer what's fair. Not charity, but justice. There's a difference. Richard nodded thoughtfully. You really have changed. The Frank I knew would never talk like this. The streets are a tough school, but an effective one, said Frank. They teach you what really matters. Fast. On Friday, it was Constance's turn to seek out Richard. She showed up at his construction company during business hours, causing a small stir among the employees. I need to speak with him, she told the secretary. Do you have an appointment? Asked the secretary, eyeing Constance's simple clothes skeptically. Tell him it's Constance Wilson. He'll see me. 5 minutes later, Constance was in Richard's office, admiring how he'd rebuilt his professional life. Nice office, she said. Very different from that makeshift corner you had back in the days with Frank at the construction company. Constance, what can I do for you? Richard asked nervously. I want you to know I didn't come here to ask for money, she said. I came so you'd understand what your accusation did to me. I'm listening. When you fired me for theft, I couldn't get another job as a housekeeper. No one wanted to hire someone with a tarnished record. I had to work as an office cleaner, earning less than half of what I made with you. Richard lowered his head but didn't interrupt. My son had to leave the private school he was attending. He had to go to a public school, which was terrible in our neighborhood at the time. He lost opportunities that never came back. I'm not finished yet, she said firmly. I spent years avoiding walking past your house because I was ashamed of what the neighbors might think. I moved neighborhoods to escape the gossip. My son grew up without understanding why his mother had become such a sad and bitter person. Richard was visibly shaken. I didn't know that. You didn't want to know, Constance corrected. It was easier to turn me into the villain of the story than to admit you were making an unfair decision. You're right, Richard conceded. I was a coward. Now I want you to understand one thing. I don't need your forgiveness. You're the one who needs mine, and I still don't know if I'll give it. Constance stood to leave, but paused at the door. Tomorrow, I'll go to your mother's house. Not for you, but for her. Mrs. Elizabeth has always been a fair woman, and she deserves to see this situation resolved. Saturday arrived with the overcast skies typical of a New York autumn. Mrs. Elizabeth's home in Georgetown had been prepared to host the most important meeting of these people's lives. Frank arrived first, wearing borrowed clothes from a street friend who was roughly the same size. He wasn't elegant, but he was clean and presentable. Constance and Jason arrived a few minutes later. She wore her best dress, and Jason had borrowed a dress shirt from a neighbor. Richard was the last to arrive, carrying a leather briefcase full of documents. "Good afternoon, everyone," Mrs. Elizabeth greeted them in the living room. "I hope we can resolve this situation like civilized people." "So do I," said Constance, sitting in the armchair Mrs. Elizabeth offered. "Then let's begin," Richard said, opening the briefcase. "I've brought some documents that might clarify a few things." "What documents?" asked Frank. "The construction company's financial records from the last months before bankruptcy," Richard replied. "And the payment records for all employees, including Constance." He handed her a stack of papers. "These are your pay stubs. You can see I really was delaying everyone's pay in those final months." Constance examined the papers carefully. "It's true, but that doesn't justify accusing me of theft." "It doesn't," Richard agreed, "but it explains why I was so desperate. I owed everyone, including you." "Richard," Frank said, "can you show me the records from the shopping mall project?" Richard handed him another folder. "It's all there, including the information you hid from me about the land issues." Frank flipped through the papers and found the documents he was looking for. "Constance, want to see what I kept from Richard?" She read them silently. "So you were both lying to each other?" "I was lying to him," Frank admitted. "Richard was just trying to survive with the information he had." "That doesn't absolve me of firing you unfairly," Richard said to Constance. "Frank deceived me, but you were innocent in all this." Jason, who had stayed quiet until then, finally spoke. "There's one thing I still don't understand. If you two were such good friends, why didn't you help each other when everything fell apart?" Frank and Richard exchanged glances. "Pride," said Frank. "Pure male pride." "Fear," said Richard. "Fear of admitting I'd failed as a businessman and as a friend." Mrs. Elizabeth stood and walked to the window. "Do you know what the problem is with both of you? You always thought admitting fault was a sign of weakness." "And what's the solution?" Constance asked. "The solution is for each of you to take responsibility and do what's within your power to make things right," Mrs. Elizabeth said. "I agree," said Constance. "Richard, what do you propose to make up for what you did to me?" Richard took a deep breath. "First, a public apology. I'll publish a statement in the local newspaper admitting I wrongfully accused you. Go on. Second, compensation for the 15 years you lost. I calculated what you missed out on by working in worse conditions because of me." He handed her a paper with detailed calculations. Constance examined the numbers carefully. "It's a fair amount," she admitted. "But how do I know you can pay this?" "Because I'm selling one of my apartments to get the money," said Richard. "This isn't charity. It's a debt I acknowledge." Frank whistled softly. "That's a lot of money, Richard." "It's what I owe," Richard replied. "And Frank, you also deserve compensation for the losses you suffered because of my rash decisions." "I don't deserve anything," Frank protested. "I deceived you first." "You deceived me, but I abandoned you," Richard said. "Two wrongs don't make a right, remember?" Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell smiled. "Finally, you're talking like the men I once knew." "But I have one condition," Constance said. "I don't just want the money. I want the two of you to work together again." "How so?" Frank and Richard asked in unison. "I want you to start a social enterprise, something that helps people in tough situations like you were in. That way the money Richard pays me will go toward making a difference in others' lives." Jason looked at his mother with admiration. "Mom, that's a brilliant idea." "It's more than an idea," Constance said. "It's a condition. Either you do this, or I won't accept the compensation." Frank and Richard exchanged glances. "What are you thinking?" Richard asked. "A business that helps homeless people get back on their feet," Frank said. "I know that reality firsthand. I know what works and what doesn't." "And I have the resources and business experience," Richard added. "It could work." Mrs. Blackwell clapped her hands. "Now you're thinking like the idealistic young men I met 30 years ago." "But I have one more condition," Constance said. "Jason will work with you. He needs an opportunity and you need someone young to keep you in line." Jason was surprised. "Mom, I don't know if—" "Yes, you do," Constance said. "You're educated, you have integrity, and you have energy. You're exactly what they need." "I accept," Richard said, "as long as Frank does too." Frank extended his hand to Richard. "I accept, But this time, we do everything transparently, no hidden information. Deal, Richard said, shaking his old friend's hand. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 2 weeks later, local newspapers published a statement signed by Richard Blackwell, publicly admitting he had wrongfully accused Constance Wilson of theft 15 years earlier. The note caused a small stir in New York City's business circles. Constance received calls from several former employers, apologizing for not believing her back then. Some even offered her work, but she politely declined, explaining she now had other plans. Frank was temporarily staying in the guest apartment Richard kept while they searched for a suitable location for their new venture. What about this property? Jason asked, showing a rental ad in the newspaper. Where is it? Richard asked. Downtown, near Grand Central, a high-traffic area with vulnerable people. Frank examined the address. I know that area. It's perfect. Plenty of people there need help. Then let's go see it, Richard decided. The property was an old mansion divided into several rooms. The owner was eager to rent and offered a good price. It can serve as an office, training room, temporary dormitory and dining hall, said Frank, examining the spaces. It's bigger than we initially need, but we can grow, agreed Richard. And there's a large kitchen where my mother can teach cooking to anyone who wants to learn a trade, suggested Jason. Would Constance go for that? Asked Frank. She's dying to have something useful to do, said Jason. She said she wants to turn the settlement into something that benefits more people. A week later, they were signing the lease. The new venture would be called Fresh Start, Social Reintegration Center. Fancy name for a simple operation, joked Frank. It needs to sound professional, Richard argued. Otherwise, no one will take it seriously. And what exactly will our focus be? Asked Jason. Helping homeless people get documents, jobs and housing, explained Frank. But in an organized way, not just handing out charity. We'll offer showers, a mailing address, clean clothes for job interviews and basic training courses, added Richard. And meals for those in need, chimed in Constance, who had arrived with grocery bags for the kitchen. Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell appeared at the door carrying a sign. I brought a little something for the decor. The sign read, Everyone here deserves a second chance. Perfect, Grandma, said Jason. Mrs. Blackwell had insisted he call her that, saying she'd always wanted a grandson. The first few months were tough. Few people knew about Fresh Start's work, and resources were limited. Frank went out every morning to talk to acquaintances on the streets, explaining what they offered. It's hard to convince people, he reported in a meeting. Many think it's religious propaganda or a scam. How can we change that? Asked Richard. By showing results, said Constance. One person helped will tell others. And that's exactly what happened. The first success was Marcus, a 40-year-old man who had lost his family and job due to alcoholism. Frank found him sleeping in the square in front of the building. Marcus, how about a hot shower and something to eat? Offered Frank. What's the catch? Asked Marcus, suspicious. No catch, just a conversation. Marcus hesitated but eventually agreed. In their talk, they learned he was an electronics technician, a profession in high demand. Can I get my documents here? Asked Marcus. We can help with that, said Jason. And we can also get you proper clothes for interviews. 3 weeks later, Marcus landed a job at a TV repair shop downtown. He returned to Fresh Start to thank them and brought 2 friends who also needed help. Now I see how this works, said Richard. It's a chain of goodwill. It's more than that, Frank corrected. It's giving people the tools to help themselves, not charity, empowerment. Constance had become the heart of the place. Beyond cooking classes, she organized discussion groups where people could share their struggles. Mrs. Wilson, said a middle-aged woman who attended the sessions, you remind me of my mother. You have a way of making people feel at home. That's because I know what it's like to feel lost in life, Constance replied. I've been there too. Mrs. Blackwell came every day to help however she could. Even in her 70s, she insisted on contributing actively. Grandma, you don't have to work so hard, said Jason. Yes, I do, she answered. This is the first time in years I've seen my son doing something that truly matters. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Richard had visibly changed. The rigid, profit-driven man had given way to someone more human and understanding. "Frank," he said one afternoon, "do you think we can rebuild our friendship?" "I think we can do better than that," replied Frank. "We've built a new friendship based on who we are today, not who we were before." And who are we today? Men who've learned that true success is measured by the difference we make in others' lives. 6 months after opening, Fresh Start had already helped over 50 people reintegrate into society. Word had spread, and they began receiving donations from local business owners and merchants. "We need more space," said Jason. "People are sleeping in line just to get help." "The house next door is empty," Frank informed them. "I spoke to the owner and he's willing to rent it at a good price." "Then let's expand," Richard decided, "but carefully so we don't lose focus." The expansion brought new challenges. They hired more staff and created new programs, including adult literacy and craft workshops. Constance became the educational coordinator, a role she discovered she had a natural gift for. "I never imagined I'd love teaching so much," she said. "You've always been a teacher," Mrs. Elizabeth told her. "You just didn't know it." One day, an elegant woman showed up at Fresh Start asking for Frank. It was Teresa, his ex-wife, who had gotten the address through an acquaintance. "Frank, it's me, Teresa. Can we talk?" Frank was visibly shaken. They hadn't seen each other in over 10 years. "Of course, let's go to the private room." "I heard about the work you're doing," Teresa said. "I'm impressed." "Thank you," Frank replied, unsure what else to say. "I want to apologize," she continued. "When you lost everything, I abandoned you. I only thought of myself and the children." "You did what you thought was best at the time," Frank said. "I don't blame you." "Our children are grown now," Teresa told him. "Caroline has a degree in education, and Paul finished business school. They'd like to see their father's work." Frank's heart raced. "They know I exist?" "They've always known, and they've always asked about you. I was the one who kept them from reaching out because I was ashamed of how I treated you. Teresa, so much has changed. I know. That's why I'm here. I also want you to meet your grandchildren. Caroline has 2 beautiful daughters." Frank began to cry silently. "I have grandchildren?" "Yes. And they deserve to know the heroic grandfather who helps others." Constance, passing by the hallway, overheard part of the conversation and stepped into the room. "Forgive the interruption, but I heard family mentioned." Frank introduced the 2 women. "Teresa, this is Constance, my work partner and dear friend. Constance, this is Teresa, my ex-wife." "It's nice to meet you," Teresa said. "Frank always had a good heart. It seems you 2 make a perfect team." "We do," Constance agreed. "Your ex-husband is a special person." That night, Frank told Richard about reuniting with his family. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he admitted. "You've spent 15 years preparing for it," Richard said. "Now you just need the courage. What if they don't like who I've become?" "Impossible," said Constance, who was listening. "You've become the best version of yourself." Frank's reunion with his children took place at Fresh Start itself. Caroline and Paul were moved to see the work their father was doing. "Dad," Caroline said, "I'm so proud of you. This is beautiful work." "And we could help," Paul offered. "My business degree could be useful here. And I could develop educational activities for the children who come with their parents," Caroline suggested. Richard watched from a distance, smiling. "Constance, did you see? Frank's family came together because of our work." "I saw," said Constance, moved. "And do you know what that means?" "What?" "That the bad things from the past can bring good things in the present when we have the courage to fix our mistakes." Jason approached the 2. "Mom, I have some news to share." "What news?" asked Constance. "Caroline, Frank's daughter, and I are dating," he said, blushing. Constance and Richard exchanged glances and began to laugh. "Now that's what I call a happy ending," said Richard. "It's not the ending yet," corrected Constance. "It's just the beginning of a new chapter." 2 years after the meeting at the restaurant, Fresh Start had become a reference for social assistance in New York City. Frank and Richard had expanded the project to 3 locations in different neighborhoods. Constance had graduated in social pedagogy through a night course, fulfilling her dream of having a recognized profession. Jason married Caroline, and they worked together coordinating the children's activities for the project. Mrs. Elizabeth, now 75, remained active and had become the official ambassador for Fresh Start, pitching the idea to other business owners interested in social responsibility. "Richard," she said one morning, "do you know what makes me proudest of you?" "What, Mum?" "You've learned that true wealth is making others wealthy too. Wealthy in dignity, in opportunities, in hope." "I learned from the best teachers," said Richard, looking at Frank and Constance, who were organizing a new literacy class. That afternoon, as he watched the steady flow of people coming and going from Fresh Start, Richard reflected on how much life had changed. The chance meeting at the restaurant had turned into the best thing that ever happened to him. Frank walked over and stood beside his friend. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that if someone had told me this story 2 years ago, I'd have said it was impossible," Richard replied. "Why?" "Because I didn't believe people like us could change so much." "And now you do?" "Now I know that all of us are capable of starting over, no matter our age or past mistakes. We just need the courage to face the truth and the humility to ask for forgiveness." Frank smiled. "And a little push from friends at the right time." "That too," Richard agreed. "Lucky for us, Constance didn't let us shirk responsibility." Constance, who had overheard the conversation, joined them. "Do you know what the best part of all this is?" "What?" they asked. "It's that every person who leaves here to start a new life takes a little bit of this good energy with them to others. It's a chain that never stops." "Like Marcus, who brought 2 friends," Frank recalled. "And those 2 brought others," Richard added. "I've lost count of how many people have come through here." "The number doesn't matter," said Constance. "What matters is that each one got a chance to believe in themselves again." Just then a young man approached them. It was Marcus, the first person helped by Fresh Start, now well-dressed and smiling. "Everyone, I have good news," he said. "I got a promotion at the shop and I want to make a donation to the project." "Marcus, you don't have to donate anything," said Frank. "Your recovery is the greatest reward." "I need to," Marcus insisted. "I want others to have the same opportunity I did. And besides, I brought my girlfriend to meet you." A friendly woman stepped forward. "Hi, I'm Patricia. Marcus never stops talking about your work." "Patricia has been through hard times too," Marcus explained. "She was left by her husband with 2 young daughters and was on the streets for a while. But I managed to get back on my feet," said Patricia. "And now I work at a daycare, helping other mothers in tough situations." Constance hugged Patricia. "That's the beauty of life. Those who were helped one day can help others in the future." "It's true," agreed Patricia, "and that's why I came to propose a partnership. The daycare where I work serves many families who need your support," Richard smiled. "New opportunities to expand our work always come up. And there are always people willing to help," observed Frank. "It's amazing how supportive people can be when they find the right channel." Caroline and Jason approached the group carrying a cake. "Hey, did you forget that today is the 1-year anniversary of Grandma and Grandpa's wedding?" said Caroline, teasing. "What wedding?" asked Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell, who had just arrived. "Your wedding to the project," explained Jason. "It's been a year since you all came together to create this crazy family." Everyone laughed. It was true. They had become an unconventional but very close-knit family. "Then let's celebrate," said Constance. "Call everyone to the main room." Within minutes, staff, volunteers, and those they supported gathered for the small celebration. Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell asked to speak. "A year ago," she began, "my son was a successful but unhappy businessman. Frank was a man lost in life. Constance carried a 15-year-old pain, and Jason had no future prospects." She paused, looking at each of them. "Today, Richard is a successful and happy businessman. Frank has reunited with his family and his dignity. Constance fulfilled her dream of becoming an educator, and Jason has built a beautiful family with Caroline." "And what about you?" someone in the audience asked. "What changed in your life?" Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell smiled. "I got back the son I raised and gained a much bigger family than I ever imagined." Constance stood up to speak. "I want to thank everyone who made this transformation possible, especially Richard, who had the courage to admit his mistakes, and Frank, who taught me that it's possible to forgive without forgetting. And I, said Frank, want to thank Constance, who didn't let me run from the responsibility of fixing past mistakes. Richard was the last to speak. 2 years ago, I thought success meant having money in the bank and respect from other businessmen. Today, I know success is looking in the mirror and liking the person I see reflected. And what's the recipe for that? Asked Marcus. Simple, Richard replied. Own up to your mistakes, apologize when necessary, and dedicate part of your life to something bigger than yourself. The small celebration lasted through the afternoon. Stories were shared, future plans were discussed, and laughter filled the rooms of the big house. When everyone had left, the 6 founders of the project stayed behind, talking. Do you think we've proven that people can change? Asked Jason. We don't need to prove it to anyone, said Constance. We changed. That's enough. And we helped many others change too, added Frank. The most important thing, said Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell, is that we've created something that will keep going even when we're no longer here. You'll live to be 100, Richard joked. Maybe, Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell laughed, but the project will live forever because we planted a seed that never stops growing. At the end of that special day, everyone went home with hearts full of gratitude. Constance and Jason walked together to the bus stop. Mom, said Jason, thank you for not giving up on seeking justice. It wasn't justice I found, son, Constance replied. It was something much better, the chance to turn an old pain into a force for good. And now, what's the next step? Now we keep making a difference one day at a time, and we enjoy the beautiful family we've built along the way. Frank, who now lived in a simple but dignified apartment, spent the night writing a letter to the grandchildren he would soon meet in person. Dear granddaughters, he wrote, Grandpa lost many years of his life to pride and fear, but I've learned it's never too late for a fresh start. When you grow up, I hope you remember that everyone deserves a second chance, including yourselves when you make mistakes. Richard, now in his simpler home after selling his luxury apartment to pay Constance's compensation, looked at old photos from when he was partners with Frank. How young and naive we were, he murmured. We thought we knew everything about life. But he didn't regret his recent choices. The money he'd lost in material possessions, he'd gained in personal fulfillment. Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell, before bed, said her prayer of gratitude. At 75, she was living one of the most rewarding phases of her life, watching her son finally become the man she always knew he could be. The next day, life at Fresh Start resumed with its intense yet fulfilling routine. New people arrived seeking help, new volunteers offered their support, and new dreams began to take shape. You know what I've learned from all this? Constance said to Frank as they prepared lunch for the residents. What? That there's no mistake that can't be fixed as long as we have the courage to try. And the humility to admit we were wrong, Frank added. And the patience to rebuild lost trust, Richard chimed in, arriving with good news. What news? They asked. The city approved our project to open a 4th location, he said, smiling, and they offered us a larger lot in the suburbs. That means we'll be able to help even more people, Constance said, clapping her hands. It means our family will grow even bigger, Frank corrected, and that's exactly what happened. Fresh Start continued to grow, not just in size but in its impact on the community. Stories of resilience multiplied, families reunited, and people discovered talents they never knew they had. But the greatest achievement wasn't in numbers or statistics. It was in the quiet transformation happening in the hearts of everyone who passed through, residents, staff, volunteers, and founders alike. They all learned that life always offers a second chance to those brave enough to seek it, and that past mistakes can become the driving force for a better future. Frank never slept on the streets again, but he never forgot what it was like. Richard never made another business decision without considering its human impact. Constance never let herself be humiliated again, but learned the power of forgiveness. Jason built a career based on purpose, not just a paycheck. And Mrs. Blackwell, she became living proof that there's no age limit to making a difference in the world. 3 years after that fateful meeting at the restaurant, when Frank saw Jason putting vitamin C in Richard's juice and thought it was something suspicious, The 5 protagonists of this story were together again, but this time it wasn't at an elegant restaurant table or in Mrs. Blackwell's formal living room. It was on a makeshift stage in Fresh Start's courtyard, being honored by the city council for their service to the community. "Who would have thought," Frank whispered to Richard, "that mess at the restaurant would lead to this?" "I'd say it was the best misunderstanding of my life," Richard replied. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Constance corrected, overhearing. "It was fate pushing us where we needed to be." "Fate or your stubbornness," Jason joked. "Same thing," Constance laughed. "What matters is we ended up where we were meant to be." When they received the honor, each gave a short speech, but it was Mrs. Elizabeth who concluded with the most touching words. "My dears," she said, looking at the audience filled with people who had been helped by the project, "you are proof that stories don't end with, 'and they lived happily ever after.' They end with, 'and they kept fighting to make a difference every day.'" The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. It wasn't just applause for the honorees, but a celebration of everything that can happen when people decide to turn pain into purpose. That night, as they cleaned up the space after the ceremony, the 5 founders of Fresh Start talked about the future. "Do you think our story will inspire others?" asked Jason. "If it inspires even one person, it was worth it," said Frank. "But I'm sure it will inspire many," said Constance, "because it's a true story about real people." "And about second chances," added Richard. "And about the importance of never giving up on people," Mrs. Elizabeth finished. Years later, when they told this story to others, they always ended it the same way. By showing that no matter how lost you are, no matter how many mistakes you've made, no matter how many years have passed, it's always possible to start over. And that sometimes the best things in life begin with the worst misunderstandings. But most importantly, family isn't just about sharing the same blood, but about choosing to walk together in the same direction, supporting each other in tough times, and celebrating victories together. Frank, who began the story as a homeless man peering through a restaurant window, ended it as the general coordinator of a nationally recognized social project, remarried, and a proud grandfather. Richard, who started as a wealthy but empty businessman, ended as a fulfilled social entrepreneur, reconciled with his best friend and a role model for other business owners. Constance, who began carrying a 15-year-old grudge, ended as a respected educator, a strong woman who turned pain into wisdom. Jason, who started as a young man torn between hatred and hope, ended as a leader of a new generation committed to social justice. And Mrs. Elizabeth, who began ashamed of the son she had raised, ended as the proud matriarch of a family that chose to make the world a better place. 5 lives transformed by a chance encounter, 3 misunderstood words, and a courageous decision to face the past instead of running from it. A story that proves we never know when life will give us the chance to start over. And when that opportunity comes, we must have the courage to seize it with both hands, because sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the biggest challenges, and true success isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we manage to transform. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of transformation and forgiveness. Do you believe it's possible to change even after so many years? Have you ever experienced a similar situation? Leave your honest comment. Your opinion is very important to us. And if you liked it, don't forget to hit the like button and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.